In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern. There's a lot of interesting things developing. I missed yesterday's video. If I ever miss a video, it's usually because I'm busy or because I don't think there's a good enough topic to really make a solid video on and have a, clear, concise topic that the video is about. So if I have a little bit of like mixed opinion on the model runs, I might want to see the next day's model runs to make sure it kind of falls in line with what we're seeing that day. And I'm seeing a bit of that from yesterday. So the general consensus here is that obviously we have very brutal cold here expected, at least for the next few days. We get a little bit more transient, I think is the perfect way to put it after that, where we're going to see some warm-ups move their way in a little bit more frequently than what we've been seeing, but there will still be cooldowns. That's what I'm seeing from both major models here. And with that is going to come more storm opportunities. The bad part about consistent cold just sitting in place is that no low pressure systems seem to be able to make their way in. They do sometimes, but it's a lot less frequent. When we get these warm up, cool down patterns, that's when you start to see some disruption in the low pressure department, and we start to see some lows move in. And that is when things could get really, really interesting. I am going to show you some long-range guidance at the end of this video, which we haven't done for a while, and that is going to suggest that there is colder times ahead, actually, potentially for the very, very end of December timeframe. So we're going to be looking at that, more storminess at times as well, as I've mentioned. So let's just dive into things, take a look here. First off, at our GFS model, of course, we're going to cross-reference that with our European model, which I think is just the best way to go. Interestingly enough, today we're going to see a potential snowstorm coming up in about 5 or 6 days here, maybe a little bit longer. And the GFS model is further to the northwest than the European model is. It's much further to the southeast, which you guys have heard me say. The GFS model has a southeast bias. The European model is usually a little bit more spot on with the location. But what do we do with this information when the GFS model is actually further to the north than the European model? We're going to dissect that a little bit later on. So let's take a look here at later on this afternoon and evening, and we do still have lake effect snowfall going on. Can't believe that that is still going on. We also have this low overhead that we've been discussing for probably about a week now, and this is causing both lake effect snowfall and typical snowfall associated with a low pressure system. So multiple different moving pieces here. We have colder air really diving in. It's still very cold today, but it is a bit warmer than it has been for many areas, unless you're up here. Up here, it's still very brutally cold. Really probably haven't noticed much of a difference, but mostly for the middle portions here, and then even these more southern areas, it's probably a bit warmer. As we move towards tomorrow, though, we're going to see this cold air just dive right back in, and we're still stuck in this ridge in the west, trough in the east pattern that has been so long term. I mean, it's just been through the end of November into early December here, and we've looked at probably about 2 weeks of primarily cold here at this point, which is very long term compared to a lot of cooldowns in recent years. So probably the longest term major cooldown that we've seen since I've started doing YouTube, which is about 5 or 6 years now. So pretty crazy stuff. A few years ago, this wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world, like, the early 2010s. I would still say this would be on the major side of things, though. It's just extreme at this point because we haven't seen it in so long. Plenty of snowfall still around for the Great Lakes by tomorrow into the northeast as well. We do have a major low here between Maine and Canada. This is the main driving force here. Still very dry and very warm across most of your western corridor there for Thursday. As we reach towards Friday on December 6th, we see major warm air still in place, and this is going to continue to allow primarily colder air to be around for the east. So still 2 more days after today, at least, of this major cold air. Let's take it towards Saturday, and things are starting to lift off a little bit, as you can see by Saturday the 7th here. So we're starting to see this lifting action. We still have some lake effect snowfall ongoing. Still some very cold air, especially in the northeast and mid-Atlantic. But we're starting to see some colder air able to make its way into the northwest, which could be the beginning of the end for this positive PNA, which seems to also be on the move eastward. Even some snowfall and rainfall up there for the northwest. So a big shift in the western department, which, as you guys know, I preach all the time. Any changes that we see out west is going to affect us downstream in the east. As we move towards Sunday, We can see that this cooldown is basically gone for the moment, at least here, even in the mid-Atlantic. So this is going to be your first official kind of average to maybe a couple of degrees above average day here in the east. I'm not seeing anything too extreme in the above normal department, but we're going to return to a much more normal to slightly above normal look here for the day on Sunday the 8th. And you can see that the driving force behind this is this colder air and snowfall that's moving into the northwest. This almost immediately causes the warm air to move eastward. We do see some rainfall moving in. Again, precipitation is going to become a lot more common when we see this. Monday here on the 9th, what we're seeing is precipitation all over the place for the east. We see a low here over the upper Midwest, even bringing some snowfall to Minnesota and the Dakotas, maybe even northern Wisconsin there. A little bit of warmer air able to make its way back onto the west coast could move this cold air back eastward. I think this is an important time to mention that the GFS model as of now is the warmer of the two models. So the one that we're going to look at in a second will look a little bit more bullish in the cold direction. As we take a look here at Tuesday on the 10th, we see this growing and expanding warm area over the west, and this likely will push the cold air eastward, where we do have precipitation still all over the place for the east coast. Even some Rocky Mountain snowfall. It's pretty hard to come by, but it is around. For Wednesday, this is when it becomes clear that we have a growing positive PNA once again. We're probably on like day 3 of warmer air, maybe 4, so we will see a few days of warmth here. A little bit more of a significant low taking place between Mississippi and Alabama. And if this meets up with this cold air correctly, we could see some snowfall come out of it. Look at as we move towards 4 a.m. on Thursday, the 12th of December here, and we have snowfall from Tennessee and Kentucky up through Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, into New England here. We have plenty of snowfall to the north and west of this low that's now located somewhere between North Carolina and Virginia there in the more western portions of those states. The European model is actually offshore with this storm, so we're seeing a bit of a difference here between the two models, and that could make a drastic difference. The European model is also later with the storm. If we were looking at this time frame, the GFS models here, the European model would be much more like here, but the eventual tracks are very different with those two solutions. Now, this cold air is moving in progressively, so I want you to pay attention to that, because that's the primary reason I think here for the further west or further east outcome. As this cold air moves to the east, so does the jet stream, and if the jet stream's further east, that storm will ride along it. If the storm is further behind, it's just going to move where the jet stream is. So if it moves in quicker, it's further west. If it moves in later, it's further to the east, because the jet stream will be further to the east as it's currently moving in due to this growing positive PNA that is resurging back over the west. So I hope that makes sense. The timing is everything here, I think, with as far as where that low tracks. We can see that this does become a pretty impactful snowstorm here. We can see that it's a 996 right by Long Island. Pretty classic location, and this would be an interior eastern major snowstorm. West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine there seeing some major snowfall. This growing and very expansive positive PNA here located over the west, and this cold air is now about to be centered over the east once more. Again, the European model still doesn't even have it here by the time we're looking at 1 p.m. here on Thursday. We actually got to wait for the 13th for the European model. The GFS model has it already moved out by the time the European model has it moving up. So we have a big discrepancy there in the timing. We can see that we have moved back into a positive PNA trough in the east pattern here by the time we're reaching about 1 a.m. on Friday, December 13th. But the one thing to note is that this is a very wide positive PNA. It's stretching into the plains here, and this will probably make this a shorter lived trough if that occurs. Let's see how long it lasts here. We get to Friday afternoon, and then look at this Saturday afternoon. It's already pretty much gone, and we see a returning trough to the west, ridge throughout the central and eastern states, low here over the plains, higher pressure in here as well, so drier conditions. We return right back into the warmth here if this model is correct, which we're going to see some very different stuff on the European model. We do see snowfall here throughout the mountainous west returning with that cold air, so they get some much needed snowfall that's been lacking for at least a week now. Sunday on the 15th, it's a lot of the same. Monday the 16th, we get a growing low here over the southern plains that could ride along this jet stream. This could be a major snowstorm somewhere in here for the northern plains. Let's see what happens here. And yeah, we do see this start to take off by 1 a.m. on Tuesday, December 17th. Major snowstorm moves through, eventually moves out, and I want to see, we get colder in the east, but we don't get the true cold air in the east. This is by December 20th. We're still looking at more of a trough in the west, more of a ridge here in the east, but I would say this is very close to normal conditions throughout a lot of the eastern states with slightly below normal temperatures in the west. This is a lot less of an aggressive pattern than what we've been seeing. As we take a look at the European model, though, again, we're going to see a lot more action here. We see that cold air move down in the east, warm air in the west. It does warm up in the east for Sunday on the 8th, same as the GFS. We see that rainfall move in, much needed precipitation. Here we are on Wednesday afternoon. Here we are on Thursday afternoon. Again, the GFS model by this point would have a low somewhere near here, bringing major snowfall. And here, European model says, where is it? It's not here. That's for sure. Notice the positive PNA is much thinner here, much more of a true positive PNA, and we have much deeper cold air moving into a lot of the east due to this. So we're seeing a very interesting pattern. But as we move forward a couple of hours, we see that low start to develop more offshore. It's a weaker snowstorm, but we do get more eastern snowfall here, as opposed to where the GFS model placed that. So definitely very, very interesting here. As we keep going towards about, this would be about 6 a.m. Let me switch to 7 a.m. there on Friday, December 13th. We do see snowfall for areas of northern New Jersey, New York City, and into southern New England. But again, this is a little bit more minor on this model, a lot less intense. Cold air still around. Lasts a little bit longer, maybe through Saturday evening, not too much longer. The main difference here is that we don't really see a negative PNA developing as of now. There is some colder air moving on, but the GFS model was much more aggressive with this. So what we end up seeing is still a little bit of cooler air moving into the east, a lot closer to normal, if not a little bit below normal maybe for a lot of these areas, still by Sunday the 15th. As we keep going towards Monday the 16th, we see a major trough moving into the east, more major cold air, kind of back to like what we are today. This Monday the 16th looks a lot like today, what I'm seeing on the European model. Despite some colder air along the west, it's not a full-on negative PNA pattern, and I think that's the reason why we're seeing these differences here in the east. Again, I probably stressed it enough, but whatever happens in the west is going to directly impact what happens to the east. Tuesday the 17th is very interesting. When we look at the jet stream, it's very flat. I mean, this is very, very flat. We're seeing kind of cold in the north, warm to the south, just kind of more normal than what's normal, if that makes sense. It's just not even really what we typically see at all. We do see some pretty major snowfall across the northern plains and the upper Midwest here. As we keep moving towards Wednesday, we see things are cooling in the east, actually, and we actually end up with a more major trough. And I think what we're left with here on the 19th is colder air moving into the east in a minute. We start to see some warmer air pushing into the west. So this model is more on board with the long-term colder air moving back in. Now, the total precipitation, as we take a look at this, the west does start to get more, which is great news. The upper Midwest with this snowstorm and kind of like the plains start to get more as well. And then the deep south up the east coast also dealing with quite a bit. So let's see what the anomalies look like. And it's pretty below average in the northwest still. There's a couple of pockets of above average precipitation. They need a lot to get to their average here in the winter. We're still seeing quite a bit here over the Sierra Nevada as well, but there is some glaring below average amounts out west here still, despite this surge that we're seeing. Storm moves up through the upper Midwest and plains, and then we see a lot of action here up the east coast, bringing mostly above average precipitation unless you're along the southeast coast. So, with all that being said, the total snowfall, the GFS model is going to look a lot more aggressive, obviously. The west sees quite a bit here of snowfall, much needed. So despite the lack of precipitation, the snow is on the increase significantly. Plains into the upper Midwest, we are seeing a storm move through there, and then also for a lot of the east here, we see this interior eastern snowstorm. So let's move into the northeast here. And yeah, if we see this storm pull through, I think we could end up with 10 inches plus. We do see a lot of like 20s and 30s in there, but that probably isn't going to accumulate. This is the total snowfall. Let's really quickly move into the positive snowfall depth change. here. And yeah, so around 10 inches, maybe up to 15 in the mountains here is what that storm would end up being like. So we see areas in here dealing with quite a bit of snowfall. Northern PA is where those 10-inch plus amounts start into the Finger Lake regions. Obviously, the Adirondacks there, Catskills, Green Mountains and Berkshires, White Mountains here, and then the kind of like central and northern regions of Maine. They're also dealing with 10 inches plus. Again, 10 to 15 in here, I think, is like the cap of what we would see from a storm like that. And mostly for the mountainous areas. But we do see some low elevation areas ending up with 2, 4, 6, maybe 8 inches of snowfall. So could be a major one to say the least, especially for like the early to mid-December timeframe. So could be another decent snowstorm here. Let's end up in the north central states and take a look at this one as well on the positive snowfall depth change that we see from Nebraska up through eastern Dakotas into Minnesota. We're seeing again 2 to 4, maybe in the blues, maybe up to 6, 2 to 6. We're seeing purples in the 6 to 10. 10 to 20 there in the pinks. So another kind of like 10, 15-inch max here for a lot of northern Minnesota, southeastern North Dakota, and northeastern South Dakota. With all this being said, I'm going to move back to the kind of whole United States. With all this being said, we can expect shifts still. These are pretty long range, especially the central United States one. And then the eastern one, we have huge discrepancies. So that is just the current guidance. That's not my forecast or anything. That is not what I'm calling for. I'm just breaking it down as we see it. But expect changes on both of these. I can't stress that enough. We're going to be talking about it daily. So if you want to tune in and see those changes, feel free to do so. But don't expect it to look exactly this way. This is not a forecast. As we move into the European model, as expected, we see significantly less over the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic areas. Same story here for the plains into the upper Midwest. However, the West, the mountainous West, does see a decent amount here as well. I want to take us to the Northeast here as well. Just take a look at what this storm brings. A lot of this is going to be lake effect and other storms. We do see multiple move through, but I want to take us to where we just see, well, here's the lake effect. This is the hard part, right? Well, we're still in Kutra. Let's take a look here at our snow depth change. This is much more like it. So, I think we're going to have a better bet looking at actually this. So this is kind of that snowstorm that we were taking a look at specifically, and we see a couple of inches here perhaps from central Virginia through DC, Maryland, southeastern Pennsylvania, northern and central New Jersey, northern Delaware there, into like New York City, Long Island, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and southeastern Massachusetts. In the grays and blues, and dusting up to an inch, maybe a couple of inches is what you would expect in there. Keep in mind, it's just model guidance, just like the last model. But we do see this kind of pocket of deeper blues into purples here for kind of like eastern Connecticut, Rhode Island into southeastern Massachusetts. And these areas is where we could be looking at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches perhaps, if this solution was correct. So definitely something to think about. As we take a look at the temperatures, we're going to see the GFS, again, a little bit warmer, and then the European model a bit cooler, and then we'll move into that long-range guidance. But let's take a look at it. Right now, we have another cool down that we're on the brink of. So here's Thursday the 5th, Friday the 6th, Saturday the 7th, moving out by Sunday the 8th here. Here's the high temperatures. Again, warmer, neutral to warmer here for most of the East. Let's take a look here at Monday, getting a bit warmer. Tuesday as well. Wednesday could be significantly warmer than things have been. We do get this transient cool down moving in for Thursday into Friday again. So look at this. More cold air moving in. A real quick warm up as well out west. So again, like we discussed in the beginning of the video, I see it more transient down the road. And what that means is exactly this. We're going to see warm air overtake it pretty quickly. That's going to be transient as well, as we see colder air move back in for a lot of the mid-Atlantic and Northeast once again as we approach the 20th time frame with more neutral temperatures in the West. We could really go any direction here. We could see this warm up kind of move up and out, cold air move in, warm up in the West, or we see it cool down in the West and this warm up kind of sits over the eastern states over time. That's kind of how I see that possibly ending up. When we look at the European model, we're going to see, again, Thursday, our next cooldown moves in. That's tomorrow, by the way. It's a bit cooler as well. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Here's the high temperatures on Sunday. Again, a little bit more cold hanging on for the East Coast. We do warm up for Monday, Tuesday. But look at this, already by Wednesday, colder air moving in. Thursday colder, Friday colder, Saturday colder for the East Coast and Southeast at least. Sunday warming up, but really quickly Monday we're back into the very cold temperatures. Monday the 16th, Tuesday the 17th, Wednesday the 18th. And here's that next one that's moving in, as I mentioned. We see much more of a positive PNA look here. And we see major cold air on its way to the eastern states around that 20th time frame, where the European or the GFS model had full-on warmth for all of these areas. A little bit of cooler temperatures in here. Nothing like what we're seeing right there, though. That would be non-existent on the GFS model. So huge discrepancies in the cold air down the road as well. To kind of seek more guidance, we can move into the longer range models here. Here's the 5th through the 10th on our long range CFS model. Warm in the west, positive PNA. Cold air as a result moves into the east. We've been calling for the 5th through the 10th to be cold. No huge surprises here. As we move to the 10th through the 15th, it is a bit cooler in the east still. Then the 15th through the 20th, more like the GFS model, we do see warmer air move into the east with cooler in the west. But as we move into the 20th to the 25th, we see a bit of the same. It's as we move from Christmas to New Year's Eve, the 30th, or it might be the 31st here in December. There we go. So now the day New Year's Eve here, we are seeing colder air return to the east and warmer air building for the west. Here is the 30th through the 4th of January. Again, warm in the west, cold in the east. Here is the kind of 31st through the 5th, just to get us back on track. Here's the 5th through the 10th, looking even colder in the east. And then here's the 10th through the 15th, even colder in the east, warm in the west. Now, do I think this is all going to be absolutely true? No, it's a long-range model, but it is calling for quite a bit of colder air into the east. And if we get a fraction of that, that would be a very positive sign of what to expect. I highly doubt that from Christmas through January 15th, we're going to have cold, but this could be a sign that a majority of that time frame will be cold, and that would be pretty significant for cold and snow this winter. That early to mid-January timeframe is the very, very peak of winter, so it's a very critical time, and that could completely turn the tides. If that period is warm and the rest is cold, we might not cash in on a whole lot. If that period's cold and much of the rest of winter is warm, we might still see a pretty decent winter. That is the heart of winter. Not to say that late January into February is not very critical, but if we're looking at the most critical, it's January 1st to January 15th. Maybe you can push it January 1st to the end of January, but very, very crucial. December already looking to end up quite cool in the east. Even if we end things off on a warm note, it's highly likely that it's going to end up looking very decent when we look back. January, if we get one more month basically looking cold, it's a cold winter overall. That's 2 out of 3. So definitely interesting to look ahead. We're going to look at the precipitation real quickly as well. This is going to look weird at first because it's so kind of fresh, but as we look at the mid-December timeframe, let's do 15th to 20th. We do see a lot of signals here from the plains through the Midwest. Definitely could be some storms moving through, a little bit below average for the East Coast still, and then below average for the West. As we take a look at the 20th through the 25th, though, that Christmas timeframe that also looks a bit cool, we are seeing above average precipitation even for the southeast areas. If we could see some storms coming up the coast, we could cash in on something. So definitely something to watch for. As we keep going, this is the 25th through the 30th, dries up a little bit. I'm going to wait for some interesting patterns, and we do see more in the long range, but things start to look averaged out. But definitely some interesting notes in there. There's periods of dryness and periods of more precipitation, which I can't really say looking back over the past month or month and a half, because it's been mostly just dry in the east for probably like 3 months. So to see back and forth is a huge improvement, and definitely gives me more of a positive outlook on our chances for snowfall moving forward. With all that being said, I'm going to end the video here. Be sure to tune in with us almost daily. We do miss a couple, as I noted, but we try to upload every single day. You can hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.